In this lecture, we'll take a look at the complete definition of our clock class. Before we give the full definition of our clock class, there are a couple of things I want to mention about the code that you're about to see. So the first thing is that each method is going to include a comment that specifies the preconditions and or the postconditions of that method. Okay, well, what do those mean? A precondition is a statement that specifies some condition that must be true before the method is called. So like, for example, maybe certain variables that are used as parameters have to be defined, or maybe they're initialized to specific values. But we include comments that say what must be true before we invoke the method. The post condition is a statement that specifies what's true after the method call is completed. So this is just a comment that just tells us, for example, like what happens after we run through the method. Maybe the method returns something, so it tells us what is going to get passed back when the method is done. These things are not required in our programs, but as we've said before, it's really important to document your code, and including a precondition and postcondition statement when possible really helps provide the details of what's going on right before and right after your methods are done. Now let's take a look at the code for our clock class. So we've gone over the different components, so here's the complete class that we'll be using. So we have public class clock, so that's the name of our class. We have our private variables. So we have private int hour, private int min, and private int sec. So that's going to store our hours, minutes, and seconds. We have our default constructors. Well, I should just say our constructors. So our first one's our default constructor, where we just set the hour to 0, minute to 0, and second to 0. And the way we do that is we just call set time. There's no need to just do different lines where we set hour to 0, minute to 0, sec to 0. Set time is going to take care of that for us. So we might as well just call it and pass 0, 0, and 0, and it does all the work. Our second constructor is the one where we pass parameters. So once again, we just need to call set time in here, and we just pass our hours, minutes, and seconds, and the set time method will take care of that for us. So let's take a look at our mutator. So remember, this is a mutator method because we're actually changing the values of the variables. So what we're doing here is we're going to set our hours and minutes and seconds to whatever our parameters are, but we have to make sure that they're valid. So for our hours, we have to make sure it's between it's from 0 to 23. So as long as those are true, then we'll set our hour to hours. If it's not true, then we're just going to set it to 0 by default. And we do the same thing for minutes and seconds. We have to make sure that they're both between 0 and 59. So as long as that's true, then we set min to minutes. And notice that when we're trying to check that values are within certain ranges, that we have to do two different comparisons. So we check that 0 is less than or equal to minutes, and we got to check that minutes is less than 60. The reason why I bring this up now is a common mistake is for students to do something like, I'll just type it over here real quick, 0 less than or equal to minutes less than 60. Mathematically, this is true. If you write it out, this is true, but from a program perspective, this is not true. If you're going to try to check to see if a value is within a certain range, you have to do two separate comparisons and make sure that they're both true. So that's why it's set up this way. And then if this is not true, then we set min to 0, and we do the same thing for seconds. We do two different comparisons to make sure that they go from 0 up to, but not including 60, and then we set the seconds accordingly. Now let's take a look at the other methods we have. So we have our accessors. So get hours just simply is going to return the value of our hour variable. Get minutes is going to return the value of our min variable. And get seconds is going to return the value of our second variable. Our print time method is going to print the seconds for us. Or not to print the seconds, but the entire time formatted in 2 digits for hour, a colon, 2 digits for minute, a colon, and 2 digits for second. So we got to first check if our hours value is less than 10. That means we only have one digit, which means we need to print a leading 0. So that's what this line does for us. So if it's less than 10, we will print our 0, and then this line will take care of printing our hour and the colon. Now, if our hours is greater than or equal to 10, then we don't need to print this leading 0. We'll already have our 2 digits when we print the hour value. And then we do the same thing for min and second. So we got to make sure if they're less than 10, then we need to print a leading 0. And then for minutes, we will print the value of the minute and a colon. And then for a second, we print a 0 if needed. And then we print the value of second. And then we have a couple of incrementing methods. So if we're going to increment the value of our second, we just simply increment that by 1. But if our second becomes 60, then that means we need to change our minute. So if second is greater than 59, we're going to set it to 0. And we're going to call in increment minutes, because that method takes care of incrementing the value of minutes by 1. So if we take a look at that, we increment our minute by 1. And if that value is greater than 59, then that means we need to reset our minutes and we need to change our hours. So we need to increment it by 1. And so we come to our increment hours. We increment hour by 1. Now, if it's greater than 23, which means it's become 24, we need to set hour back to 0. We have a couple more methods in here. So we have our equals method. So this will return true if our two clock objects that we're comparing are the same. Now remember, when we compare these objects, we can't just directly compare them, because then we're comparing memory addresses, which is not correct. Instead, we need to look at the respective hours, minutes, and seconds of these objects. And if they're the same, then we can say that these two objects are the same. So that's what's going on in this return statement. So we have 3 different conditions that have to be true. We have to make sure that our hour is equal to other clock.hour. We have to make sure that our minute is equal to other clock.minute. And our second is equal to other clock.second. So as long as all 3 of these are true, then this whole thing should be true. And then we have a make copy method where we are just simply copying the contents of one object into another. So what we're doing here is we're passing this other clock object. We're going to take the contents of it and store it in our current object. So hour equals other clock.hour, min equals other clock.min, sec equals other clock.sec. And then so our current object now has the contents of the other object. And then our get copy method is simply going to create a new, okay, I don't know why it moved there. Let's move it back down here. Here we go. Our get copy method is going to make a new object, and we're going to take the contents of our current object and store it in that copy. And then we're going to return the reference to that new object. So this clock temp equals new clock. That's going to create a new clock object. We're going to take our current hour, min, and sec and assign it into the new object. And then here is where we're going to return the address of that object. So if we call this somewhere else, we're going to store that result into another reference variable that has the contents of the original object.